Welcome back to another deep dive. We are incredibly excited that you're joining us today.
Yeah, really glad you're here with us.
And before we even get started, do us a massive favor. Hit that like button right now and make sure you subscribe to support the show.
It really does help us out.
It really does. It helps us keep doing what we do, which is, bringing you the most fascinating, provocative, and just exhaustive analyses of the material that you actually want to hear about.
Absolutely.
And today we have a very specific mission. We are taking a comprehensive look at a highly controversial, intensely debated ebook that was just recently published.
Right, came out in 2025.
Exactly. 2025. It's titled Dao of Diogenes, the First Sovereign MGTOW, and Rejecting the Good Opinion of Gynocentrists.
It's quite the title.
It is a mouthful, yeah. It's written by Conrad Riker.
Yeah.
And to hook you right out of the gate, you really need to understand exactly what this text is and who it's actually for.
Because it's definitely not for everyone.
No, not at all. This is a raw, completely unfiltered manifesto. It is written very deliberately for the men's rights activist community and the red-pilled manosphere.
Very specifically targeted.
Riker's goal with this book is incredibly ambitious. He claims to be decoding the foundational history of Western institutions.
Which is a huge undertaking.
Right. Examining what they were originally built on and exploring what he alleges is their complete capture by feminist and Marxist ideologies over the last century.
So he's really digging into the roots of our institutions before this supposed capture happened.
Yes, entirely. So if you are intrigued by the psychological arguments, the historical claims, and the philosophical foundations that are currently driving this really rapidly growing digital subculture, then you absolutely need to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy this book for yourself and read the original text.
You really have to read it to get the full impact.
It is a dense, aggressive, and just undeniably fascinating sociological artifact of our current cultural moment.
It certainly is a fascinating artifact, but, and I really need to step in here before we go any further into the weeds on this, I need to set some very clear ground rules for our discussion today.
Right, the disclaimer.
Yes, the content of this book is highly politically charged. It is polarizing, it is confrontational, and it deals with themes that, frankly, many people will find extremely provocative.
Yeah, sure.
So we want to make it absolutely clear to you, the listener, that in exploring this text, we are not endorsing the viewpoints presented. We are not taking sides, whether left wing or right wing, and we are not validating the book's claims as absolute objective truth.
We are just the messengers here.
Exactly. Our job today is strictly analytical. We are acting as your guides, impartially unpacking the author's arguments to help you understand what the text actually says, the historical and philosophical claims it makes, and perhaps most importantly, why this exact messaging resonates so deeply and powerfully with its target demographic.
We're mapping the territory.
We're mapping the territory of Riker's arguments, nothing more and nothing less.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the core philosophy of this book is built on a premise that completely caught me off guard.
Yeah, he really goes back to the drawing board.
He does. Riker bypasses all the modern internet discourse, all the current podcasts and forums, and he goes all the way back to ancient Greece.
Specific year, too, 300 BC.
300 BC. And he resurrects this philosopher named Diogenes of Sinope. But he frames Diogenes as the ultimate original archetype for the modern MGTOW movement.
Men going their own way.
Right. And the author paints this incredibly vivid picture of a man who literally lived in a ceramic tub in the middle of the Athenian marketplace.
Just right out there in public.
Right out in the dirt. He owned absolutely nothing except a single cloak. He begged for food, he drank rainwater, and he famously had this really crazy encounter with Alexander the Great.
Oh, this is a classic story.
It really is. So Alexander, the most powerful man in the known world at the time, comes up to Diogenes and says, "Ask anything of me, and I shall grant it."
The ultimate blank check.
Exactly. And Diogenes, just sitting there in the dirt, looks at him and says, "Stand out of my light."
Which is just an incredible power move.
It's wild. So my first question is, why Diogenes? Like, what is the author actually extracting from this specific ancient figure to build a modern socio-political philosophy today?
Well, the foundational concept here revolves around how Riker weaponizes the philosophy of ancient cynicism. For Riker, Diogenes represents two vital Greek concepts that he views as entirely lost to the modern man.
Okay, what are they?
The first is autarky, which means total, absolute self-sufficiency.
About autarky.
Yes. And the second is aletheia, which translates roughly to the unconcealment of truth or raw, unvarnished reality.
So no sugarcoating anything.
None at all. The text argues very emphatically that Diogenes wasn't living in a tub because he was accidentally poor or down on his luck.
It wasn't a tragedy.
Exactly. He actively chose that life. He weaponized his poverty.
That's a fascinating phrase. Weaponized poverty.
By owning nothing, by rejecting all societal norms, he made himself completely invisible to exploitation. Riker's thesis is that in ancient Athens, just as in modern society, property, status, and relationships are primarily mechanisms of control.
Chains.
Yes, invisible chains. Diogenes rejected marriage, famously referring to it in his time as legalized prostitution.
Wow, he really said that.
He did. He fundamentally rejected the need for social approval. Because he needed absolutely nothing from the societal structure around him. Society possessed zero leverage over him.
They couldn't take his house because he lived in a tub.
They couldn't take his reputation because he was already begging. The author is telling his readers that true power isn't about controlling others or, climbing a corporate ladder. It's about achieving total freedom from the expectations of others.
By making yourself unassailable, you become sovereign.
That is the exact thesis of the first chapter.
Let's talk about how the author illustrates that sovereignty, because the specific anecdotes Riker pulls from the historical texts are they're fascinating.
He really brings the history to life.
He does. He uses them to show that Diogenes wasn't just sitting around writing abstract theory. His whole life was a live performance of this philosophy.
Embodied philosophy.
Yeah. There's this one story the text highlights where Diogenes is walking completely barefoot through the freezing snow in Athens.
Just casually strolling in the snow.
Right. And Riker claims he's conducting a live experiment to prove to the citizens of Athens that comfort is a cage.
Comfort is a cage.
While all the other Athenian elites were wrapped up in expensive wool, huddling by the fire, Diogenes was actively training his nervous system to withstand hardship so that the threat of losing comfort could never be used against him as a form of blackmail.
That physical conditioning is crucial to Riker's interpretation. He views the modern man as dangerously softened by conveniences that actually act as subtle traps.
Right, like we're domesticated.
Exactly. You see this in another significant detail from the book regarding Diogenes' wooden drinking bowl.
Oh, this story blew my mind.
It perfectly encapsulates the mindset. Diogenes used to carry around this simple carved wooden bowl as his only possession other than his cloak.
Literally his only worldly good.
Right. One day, he observes a young boy drinking water from a fountain by simply cupping his bare hands together.
Just using his hands.
According to the legend, Diogenes immediately takes his wooden bowl and throws it away.
He just tosses it.
He realizes that even depending on a simple tool is a form of weakness. It's a subtle tether to the material world. He is engaged in a process of stripping away every single dependency, no matter how minor.
Wow.
Riker uses this to ask the reader directly, what are your wooden bowls?
Oh, that's good.
What are the things you think you need to survive, which are actually just keeping you tied to a system that extracts your labor?
That anti-establishment behavior goes beyond just material goods, right? I mean, he also targeted the intellectual elite of his day.
He went after the biggest names.
Let's look at the story of the chicken and Plato, because Riker dedicates a lot of space to this.
This is probably the most famous anecdote.
Plato was the highly respected, well-funded academic of the day, and he had recently defined a human being as a featherless biped.
Very academic, very clinical.
Right, this lofty, abstract definition that everyone in the academy applauded as brilliant. So Diogenes plucks a chicken completely bare, bursts into Plato's academy, throws the naked, bleeding bird on the floor in front of all these elite students and shouts, "Here is Plato's man!"
It's a striking image, and Riker leverages it heavily throughout the book. He frames this incident as the ultimate rejection of what he perceives as modern academic obfuscation.
The ivory tower.
Exactly. The text actively compares Plato's abstract, disconnected theories to modern gender studies and critical theory departments.
He draws a direct line there.
He does. Diogenes wasn't writing counter-essays to debate Plato on Plato's terms. He was using visceral, undeniable physical reality to mock the hypocrisy and the detachment of the elite class.
He just brought a plucked chicken.
Riker is urging his readers to adopt this exact same posture regarding modern institutions. The advice is essentially, do not debate the system using their vocabulary.
Don't play their game.
Right. Mock it. Expose its inherent absurdities through your actions, and refuse to legitimize their intellectual frameworks.
This all ties directly into how Riker wants the reader to look at their own life right now. And I think it's a profound question to consider for anyone listening to us today. How much of your daily stress, your anxiety, your 80-hour work weeks is generated by maintaining what society dictates are necessary comforts?
The modern wooden bowls.
Exactly. The mortgage, the car payment, the lifestyle you maintain to impress a partner or to signal status to your peers?
Keeping up with the Joneses.
Riker is arguing that these are not indicators of success. They are sophisticated financial and social chains. He writes that men today willingly trade their autonomy for 30-year mortgages and curated lifestyles, only to find themselves stripped of those very assets in a family court proceeding later on.
Which is a heavy claim.
It is. He's asking you, the reader, to audit your possessions and your relationships and ask, are these things actually serving my freedom, or am I serving them?
And what's fascinating here is that audit of personal freedom transitions us directly into the macro-level diagnosis of the book.
Right, he zooms way out.
He expands his scope from the individual choices of a Greek philosopher to a sweeping critique of modern Western civilization. He diagnoses society with what he terms a catabolic disease.
Catabolic.
Yes, this is arguably the central theoretical framework of the entire text, and he borrows the terminology directly from thermodynamics and biology.
Hard science terms.
In those scientific fields, catabolism is a destructive metabolic process. It's a system that, in the absence of external fuel, begins consuming its own structural tissue to release the energy required to survive.
Oh, wow.
If you picture a starving human body metabolizing its own muscle mass, or a dying star burning through its own core elements until it inevitably collapses.
Right, so he takes this hard science concept and layers it over sociology and culture.
Exactly. He asserts that modern society, which he claims is fundamentally driven by cultural Marxism and modern feminism, operates as a catabolic field.
Meaning what, exactly?
According to Riker's text, these ideologies are strictly parasitic. They do not possess the capacity to build or generate new societal structures.
They just consume.
Yes, they must consume the existing structures to sustain themselves. Specifically, he argues that the system consumes male productivity, male ambition, and male inherent responsibility.
It eats the muscle.
Exactly. It extracts these resources to feed what he describes as an ever-expanding, insatiable machinery of female entitlement and state expansion.
So he's basically arguing the system is eating the very demographic that built it and currently sustains it.
That is his argument.
That is an incredibly intense framework, and he doesn't just leave it as an abstract theory. He goes methodically through major institutions to provide what he considers evidence of this capture.
He has a whole laundry list.
He does. Let's look at the education system, which he targets heavily. The book argues that modern schools have been transformed into what he calls re-education camps for boys.
Re-education camp.
Yeah. He cites examples from Stockholm, Sweden, claiming that educational models there actively punish boys for rough and tumble play. Basically, they're labeling natural male energy and biological behavior as an inconvenience, a pathology, or even a danger to the classroom environment.
And he links this early childhood suppression to broader academic outcomes. Riker argues that this systemic suppression is the direct cause of boys scoring lower than girls across the board academically in Western nations.
So it's not a gap in intelligence.
Right. His position is not that boys are less intelligent or less capable, but rather that the modern educational environment is actively hostile to how the male brain naturally learns, competes, and interacts.
The system is rigged against them from kindergarten.
He points to the macro-level funding to back this up, noting that universities are currently spending upwards of $18 billion annually on gender studies programs.
18 billion. That's a massive number.
He categorizes this entire discipline as a catabolic field, one that produces zero tangible empirical knowledge, builds no infrastructure, and exists solely to generate societal resentment and dismantle traditional norms.
He also points to curriculum changes, specifically citing California's educational guidelines.
Oh, the erasure of historical figures.
Right. He claims they are systematically erasing foundational Western thinkers like Homer and Isaac Newton from K-12 curricula.
And replacing them with what?
Replacing them with ideological agitators and grievance studies. Riker's core argument here is that the entire educational pipeline is engineered with a dual purpose: to teach young boys submission, guilt, and passivity, while simultaneously grooming young girls for social dominance and unearned authority.
If we follow his logic from the classroom, he naturally progresses into the justice system,
The enforcers.
which he views as the ultimate coercive enforcement arm of this catabolic society. The text leans on specific academic literature to build this case. For instance, he cites a 2023 Harvard study that examined Title IX and campus sexual assault tribunals.
What did the study find?
Well, according to Riker's interpretation of the data, the study revealed that 68% of campus sexual assault allegations processed through these internal systems possessed absolutely no physical evidence.
None at all.
No DNA, no corroborating witnesses, no empirical proofs. Yet the book notes male students are routinely expelled, their academic records destroyed, and their futures permanently derailed based entirely on the mechanism of accusation alone.
So I want to clarify his position here. Is he saying this is just an overcorrection by universities trying to handle a sensitive issue poorly, or is he implying something more malicious?
Oh, he is absolutely implying systemic malice.
Yeah.
Riker argues this is the state and the institutional apparatus actively and intentionally disarming men, both legally and socially.
Disarming them.
Yes. He asserts that the modern state apparatus desires a populace of dependent men. It encourages this dependency through the proliferation of state-mandated therapy, reliance on food stamps, and expanding social safety nets,
While tearing down their independence.
simultaneously dismantling any avenues for true male autonomy. The text argues that masculinity itself, the desire to protect, provide, and assert boundaries, is being treated as a psychological pathology that needs to be medicated or legislated out of existence.
That's a grim picture.
His conclusion is that when a civilization tells a man that his only inherent value is his labor and his unquestioning compliance, and then systematically strips him of his legal due process and social standing,
Yeah.
you are witnessing a catabolic system consuming its own foundational bedrock.
That transitions perfectly into the psychological mechanics of how men are kept in the system. Which brings us to a concept he calls ananke.
Ananke.
Yeah, in traditional Greek mythology, ananke is the personification of inevitability, compulsion, and absolute necessity.
Like fate.
Exactly. But Riker redefines it very specifically for his audience. He defines ananke as the false necessity of female approval.
False necessity.
This seems to be the psychological crux of his entire argument. He claims that from the moment they are born, men are socially conditioned to trade their labor, their loyalty, their resources, and ultimately their self-respect, all for the illusion of feminine affection.
It is a profound psychological critique. He argues that men are trapped in a perpetual, exhausting performative loop.
A hamster wheel.
Right. They are constantly seeking validation, status, and approval from a demographic that, in his view, the modern system has financially and culturally incentivized to be unpleasable.
Unpleasable.
Riker posits that this is not a natural state of affairs, but a manufactured dependency. By convincing men that their worth is inextricably tied to their ability to secure and maintain a relationship with a woman,
The system wins.
the system ensures that men will continue to generate wealth and participate in an economy that ultimately extracts that wealth from them.
The way he breaks down modern marriage under this concept of ananke is genuinely brutal to read.
He doesn't hold back at all.
No, he doesn't just say marriage is difficult or requires compromise. He outright labels it a success sinkhole and an asymmetric risk transfer.
Success sinkhole.
He argues that women currently control the entirety of social value in the dating marketplace, while men have been reduced to, in his exact words, ATMs with a pulse.
That is a heavy quote.
He claims that a man enters a marriage contract giving his labor, his reputation, his assets, and his future, and in return he receives emotional manipulation, the constant threat of financial ruin and behavioral control.
To substantiate this incredibly bleak worldview, he utilizes a mixture of statistical data and highly emotive personal anecdotes.
The data points are intense.
They are carefully curated to reinforce his narrative of systemic extraction. He leans heavily on a widely cited 2017 study published in the journal Evolution and Human Behavior.
And what does that study show?
He states it demonstrates that women initiate nearly 70% of all divorces in Western nations.
70%?
Yes. And for Riker, this statistic is not merely indicative of shifting cultural norms around relationship satisfaction.
Yeah.
It is empirical proof of what he calls legalized extraction.
Legalized extraction.
He argues that men are sold a culturally manufactured, romantic fairy tale of lifelong loyal partnership. But the legal reality they actually sign up for is a highly asymmetrical contract where one party is financially incentivized to terminate the agreement at any time.
Because they know they can win in court.
Exactly. Knowing they can utilize the family court system to walk away with the majority of the accumulated assets and the children.
And then he pairs that macroeconomic data with these horrifying, visceral, personal anecdotes to really drive the emotional point home.
The case studies he chose are devastating.
They really are. He details the story of a man in Austin, Texas, who spent $180,000 on his partner over the course of 3 years.
180 grand.
He paid for her lifestyle, her debts, her housing, and then she simply vanished without a trace.
Just gone.
Left him with a ruined credit score and immense debt. And because they were not legally married, the civil courts offered him zero recourse.
He lost everything.
And then he mentions another specific case of a man in Texas who is legally mandated to pay $4,000 a month in alimony for 13 years.
$4,000 a month.
He is single-handedly funding his ex-wife's lavish lifestyle, even after she had moved on and had new children with another man, while this guy is forced to drive a 10-year-old Ford and grind out 60-hour work weeks just to meet his punitive legal obligations.
Those financial examples are designed to induce outrage, but the text reaches its emotional peak with the story of Erik Johansson.
Yeah, this one was tough to read.
According to the book, in 2019, this Swedish man took his own life in a public park in Stockholm. The text claims the catalyst was the Swedish family court system, which had ordered him to pay an astonishing 85% of his net income in child support.
85%? How do you even live?
You don't. And simultaneously, they denied him any visitation rights or access to his children. Riker frames this not as an isolated tragedy, but as the logical endpoint of the catabolic state.
The ultimate extraction.
A complete state-enforced erasure of a man's fatherhood and humanity, paired with an uncompromising demand for his financial labor.
It's chilling.
Riker uses these stories to scream a singular message at the reader. The system is not broken. You cannot fix it. It is working exactly as it was designed to work, and it is designed to extract your resources until you are empty.
To further prove his point about the psychology driving this extraction, he looks at modern social media, specifically focusing on the concept of hypergamy.
Hypergamy being the sociological term for the tendency of women to seek mates of higher socioeconomic status than themselves.
Right. And he points to a very specific viral TikTok trend that was circulating called "Marry Him If He's Broke."
Oh, I remember this trend.
Yeah. So Riker observes that in this trend, female creators are making content urging men to commit to women who have no assets, arguing that true love is all that matters, and men should be providers.
But there's a flip side.
A staggering double standard. He claims these exact same demographics of women will ruthlessly delay their own commitments until they can secure a man with a six-figure salary, a luxury vehicle, and real estate.
He summarizes this dynamic with a very sharp, cynical observation. Men are socially expected to commit at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder, offering their resources unconditionally.
Right.
But women are biologically and culturally conditioned to hold out for the absolute top. This, he argues, is the very mechanism that creates that success sinkhole we mentioned earlier.
So a man is trapped no matter what he does.
Exactly. A man spends his 20s and 30s climbing the corporate ladder, sacrificing his health and free time to build wealth to become attractive to the opposite sex.
So doing everything society tells him to do.
But once he achieves that peak, he is simply viewed as a target for extraction. He will either be abandoned for someone with even higher status, or he will be divorced so his accumulated assets can be liquidated and transferred by the court.
Okay, I have to jump in here because this is where the book takes a massive pivot.
With a historical detour.
Yes. If Riker just stayed in the realm of complaining about modern family courts, alimony laws, and hypocritical TikTok trends, he would sound like just another angry voice in the manosphere echo chamber.
Just another internet grievance.
Right. But he attempts to elevate his argument by taking the reader on a sweeping macro-historical detour. He argues that the entirety of ancient history proves his point about societal collapse.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
It does. He does this by contrasting the fall of the Roman Empire and the Athenian Empire with the incredible multi-century longevity of Sparta.
And his core historical thesis is staggering.
He claims that empires inevitably fall at the exact historical moment that men stop operating as warriors and instead become domesticated providers whose primary societal goal is to please women.
It is a very specific, highly deterministic, and frankly deeply controversial lens through which to view ancient history. But to understand the book, we have to examine how he constructs this narrative.
So let's look at his framing of the fall of Rome.
If you read mainstream historians, the fall of Rome is attributed to a massive, complex web of factors.
Right, continuous barbarian invasions across overextended borders.
Hyperinflation, debasement of the currency,
Lead poisoning.
and systemic political corruption. But Riker sweeps virtually all of that macroeconomic and geopolitical context aside.
Just ignores it.
He argues that Rome did not fall to barbarians, it fell from within, and the primary catalyst was unchecked female hypergamy.
Wait, so I really want to clarify this. He is looking at the collapse of the greatest empire in the ancient world, and he's seriously pinning it on elite Roman divorce trends.
Yeah.
Is he ignoring the Visigoths entirely?
That is exactly what makes this text so provocative, and why we have to examine his specific ideological lens. He's not writing a peer-reviewed comprehensive history textbook.
He's writing a socio-political survival manual.
Deliberately filtering out the macroeconomic factors to isolate the sociological ones. To his mind, the barbarian invasions only succeeded because the internal social cohesion of Rome had already been shattered by shifting domestic loyalties.
How does he prove that?
He claims that elite Roman patrician women, and he specifically names historical figures like Fulvia and Scribonia, stopped marrying the dependable, aristocratic senators and civic leaders who maintained societal stability.
They got bored with the stable guys.
Instead, these women utilized the liberalized Roman divorce laws to dissolve their marriages and align themselves with rising, charismatic, and often violent military strongmen and warlords.
Oh. He actually refers to this in the text as the original ancient manifestation of the alpha fucks beta bucks dynamic, doesn't he?
Yes, he uses that exact modern manosphere terminology to describe ancient Roman politics.
That is wild.
He argues that by chasing genetic variance, raw dominance, and immediate power over moral loyalty, civic duty, and long-term stability, these elite women collapsed the aristocratic continuity of Rome.
It created chaos.
They threw the political system into dynastic chaos, leading to endless civil wars, which in turn weakened the borders and allowed the barbarians to cross. In Riker's framework, hypergamy was the disease. The barbarians were just the final symptom.
Wow. And he applies the exact same deterministic lens to the contrast between Athens and Sparta.
A tale of two cities.
He points out that Athens, despite being the birthplace of democracy, was incredibly gynocentric in its cultural focus. They hosted massive festivals for the goddess Athena, they elevated powerful priestesses, and crucially, they allowed female hypergamy and female inheritance of property.
Which he sees as the fatal flaw.
Exactly. Riker claims that because of this societal structure, Athenian men ended up directing all their energy into competing against each other for status, wealth, and rhetorical dominance, all in a desperate bid to attract women.
Performative virtue.
The culture became entirely about performative virtue, political maneuvering, and wealth accumulation rather than martial strength.
And what was the historical result according to Athens fell in a mere 200 years.
Only 200.
Riker notes a very specific historical detail to back this up. He points to the lawmaker Solon of Athens. He notes that Solon actually had to draft and pass specific legislation restricting women's inheritance rights.
Why would he do that?
Because unchecked female access to wealth was fueling a crisis where wives were divorcing stable, civic-minded Athenian citizens to transfer their wealth to foreign tyrants and flashy aristocrats.
And then he holds up Sparta as the ultimate historical counterexample, the anti-Athens.
The ideal state, in his eyes.
Riker notes that the Spartan state took boys away from their mothers at age 7 to enter the agurge, a rigorous, brutal system of martial training and survival.
Very harsh conditions.
He emphasizes repeatedly that Spartan women, while physically fit, had absolutely no political voice, no religious cults that dictated state policy, and no influence over military affairs.
Zero influence on the state.
In Sparta, men did not fight each other in the marketplace or the Senate for female approval. They fought together as an unbroken brotherhood, the phalanx, to defend the polis, the city-state.
And the conclusion he draws from this comparison is stark. Because of this harsh, uncompromising, masculine-centric social order, Sparta maintained its dominance and lasted for roughly 800 years.
800 compared to 200.
Right. Riker's thesis is that one city-state built a lasting, unassailable society through strict discipline, male cooperation, and the suppression of hypergamy. The other consumed itself rapidly through indulgence, female empowerment, and male competition.
It's a very clear binary he's setting up.
It is vital for you, as a listener, to reflect on how historical narratives operate here. History is constantly being interpreted, filtered, and rewritten to serve modern ideological agendas.
It's never just objective facts.
What Riker is doing is applying a very rigid, red-pilled lens to classical antiquity. He is attempting to provide a grand, almost mythic foundation for modern MGTOW grievances.
Giving a historical weight.
He's telling his readers, you aren't just an isolated, angry guy dealing with an unfair family court judge. You are witnessing firsthand the exact same cycles of civilizational decay that destroyed Rome and Athens. You are part of a historical absolute.
That epic framing is undeniably powerful for someone who is feeling disenfranchised or beaten down by the modern legal system.
It gives them a sense of purpose.
But Riker doesn't just leave his readers wallowing in a state of historical despair or deterministic doom. The entire back half of the book shifts from diagnosis to strategy.
It becomes a how-to manual.
It reads like a literal battle plan for the individual man.
Yeah.
He advocates for two major philosophical concepts here: dramanon, which he defines as the ritual of withdrawal,
Dramanon.
and catharsis, which is the conscious, painful purging of internal weakness. The ultimate overarching message of the book is actually completely anti-activism.
This is a key point.
He tells men explicitly not to protest. Do not lobby your local politicians. Do not waste your money or energy trying to reform the family court system or change divorce laws.
Because the game is rigged.
He says you cannot win a rigged game by playing by its rules. His solution: you starve the system of its required fuel by opting out completely.
This represents the absolute core of the men going their own way philosophy. Exit is the ultimate protest.
Just walk away.
Riker argues that by making themselves deliberately and consciously unmarriageable, men make themselves unassailable to the state. If you own no significant liquidatable assets that the family court can seize, if you refuse to take a wife who can divorce you, if you actively seek zero validation from mainstream society,
You become immune.
you become entirely immune to the catabolic field. He draws a direct line back to Diogenes here.
Right to the tub.
Diogenes didn't petition the Athenian Senate to lower taxes or change the laws regarding property. He stripped himself of property, lived in a tub, and mocked the politicians as they walked by.
That's brilliant.
Riker is advocating for a modern, digital, and financial version of the tub. It is a philosophy of total, uncompromising detachment.
And he uses these incredibly modern, sometimes absurd, but deeply resonant examples to explain what this detachment looks like in everyday life. My absolute favorite part of this section is the Roomba analogy.
Oh, the Roomba. It's so strange, but it works.
He spends pages talking about a hypothetical man who realizes that his robotic vacuum cleaner, his Roomba, teaches him more about dignity and respect than any of his past romantic relationships.
It sounds like a joke, but he's serious.
He's completely serious. Why? Because the Roomba just glides across the floor, does its job efficiently, cleans the house, and never once demands that the man be emotionally present.
Right.
It doesn't weaponize silence when it's upset, it doesn't guilt trip him for working late, and it doesn't dissect his character flaws over dinner.
While it sounds comical, Riker is using the Roomba to make a deeply serious point about emotional labor and exploitation.
He really is.
He uses this analogy to argue that men aren't broken, damaged, or toxic because they want to stop sacrificing their peace for relationships.
They're just tired.
They are simply waking up to the fact that the juice is no longer worth the squeeze. They are recognizing that they are being emotionally and financially exploited, and they prefer the predictable, silent utility of a machine over the chaotic demands of a modern partner.
Alongside the Roomba, he points to what he calls the corporate monk movement.
Corporate monks.
He names modern internet figures, guys like Chris Williamson and Jack Donovan, utilizing them as real-world examples. These are men who are choosing to live entirely without wives or children, focusing the entirety of their energy on intense physical fitness, the study of Stoic philosophy, and absolute self-mastery.
Total focus on the self.
Riker frames these figures as Diogenes reborn in Patagonia vests,
That's a great line.
and he backs up this lifestyle with data. He cites research from the University of Pennsylvania claiming that men who disengage from the dating market, engage in 16-hour daily fasting, and lift heavy weights 3 times a week score 34% higher on cognitive tests
44%.
and report a 50% reduction in baseline anxiety.
The message there is biologically and psychologically clear. Riker is stating that when a man stops hemorrhaging his life force, his time, and his financial resources on the exhausting, endless demands of female validation and relationship maintenance, he can turn that energy inward.
He stops the leak.
By directing that focus toward your own physical, financial, and mental sovereignty, you literally cognitively upgrade yourself. You become a superior version of yourself precisely because you are no longer acting as a host for a parasite.
He takes this theory and translates it into a literal step-by-step guide for the reader. He calls it Praxa, the 7-day sovereignty challenge.
Very actionable.
It is incredibly literal. Day 1, delete every single dating app on your phone. Tinder, Bumble, Hinge. Stop participating in what he calls the digital meat market, where you are treated as a disposable commodity.
Just cut the cord.
Day 3, move your bank accounts, restructure your finances, utilize trusts or cryptocurrency if necessary to ensure your assets are protected from future legal extraction.
Financial shield.
Day 5, physically relocate. He advises men to move to a red state county, specifically targeting jurisdictions where alimony laws are either strictly capped, highly scrutinized, or virtually non-existent.
Vote with your feet.
Day 7, sit in total silence for 1 hour. No phone, no podcast, no music, no noise. He calls this tub meditation.
Cub meditation.
It is the moment where a man reclaims ownership of his own mind and faces his own unfiltered thoughts without the constant dopamine-driven ping of digital distraction or the need for female approval.
That directive on day 5, the command to physically relocate, transitions perfectly into his concept of the polis, or the exodus.
Right, the macro movement.
Riker points to massive, ongoing demographic shifts in the United States as empirical evidence that this withdrawal is not just an internet theory. It is already happening on a macro geographical scale.
Millions of men.
He cites data claiming that 1.3 million American men relocated in the year 2022 alone, moving primarily from blue states to states like Texas, Florida, and Tennessee.
And mainstream economists say that's just for taxes.
Right. Mainstream economists will say they're moving to escape high taxes and cost of living. Riker acknowledges that, but argues the deeper unspoken motivation is to escape punitive alimony mandates, biased family courts, and hyper-liberal social environments that treat masculinity with hostility.
He even talks about specific enclaves, right? Like tech workers in Silicon Valley.
He details how high-earning male tech workers are fleeing California for places like Wyoming, specifically joining movements like the Free State Project.
The Free State Project.
They are attempting to build intentional communities founded on private arbitration, zero property tax, and a complete rejection of state intervention in personal affairs.
Seceding from the system, essentially.
Riker doesn't view this migration as men running away in defeat. He frames it as a highly tactical, coordinated retreat. These men are executing a strategic withdrawal to build a new Athens, constructing enclaves entirely outside the jurisdiction of female-dominated urban ecosystems that view them merely as taxable utilities.
And when they arrive in these new locations, they aren't just sitting in isolation, they are rebuilding what Riker calls the oikos,
The household.
the traditional Greek household or community structure. But crucially, they are doing it completely separate from women. He talks about actual, real-world, localized groups that are executing this vision right now.
He gives specific examples.
He mentions a group called Iron Hearth, operating in Alberta, Canada. This is a collective of men forming parallel, off-grid networks where they share complex legal strategies for surviving brutal custody battles,
Pooling their knowledge.
pooling resources, and teaching each other hard survival skills.
He also highlights an organization called Father's Forge, located in Australia. According to the text, these men run intensive weekend retreats deep in the bush.
And they aren't singing Kumbaya.
They aren't doing trust falls, no. They are simulating hostile cross-examinations in custody hearings.
Wow.
They are teaching each other legal literacy, emotional stoicism, and how to represent themselves against a state apparatus they view as fundamentally biased.
Preparing for war in the courtroom.
Riker argues that these men are actively reviving the ancient Greek tradition of sacred hospitality. They operate on one foundational rule: provide shelter, knowledge, and resources to any man who has been legally disarmed or financially ruined by the state.
A brotherhood.
Riker makes it abundantly clear to his reader, this is not a men's emotional support group. He categorizes this as an active, localized resistance movement.
If we pull back and look at the trajectory of this book, the final chapters zoom out to look at the global existential impact of this entire movement.
If we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yes, chapter after chapter, he details how individual men are opting out, and the logical, terrifying conclusion of that, he argues, is a complete global demographic collapse.
the collapse of birth rates.
Riker argues that the true revenge of the disenfranchised modern man isn't going to be violent uprisings, it isn't going to be forming new political parties, and it certainly isn't marching in the streets with protest signs.
No flags, no megaphones.
The ultimate revenge is simply the quiet, collective act of walking away. And when the builders, the innovators, and the protectors walk away from the societal contract, birth rates plummet, economic growth stagnates, and the entire civilization stalls.
The international examples he pulls to illustrate this demographic winter are staggering and hard to ignore.
Where does he start?
He points immediately to Japan's phenomenon of the herbivore men.
The herbivore men.
These are young Japanese men who have completely lost interest in sex, marriage, and career advancement. He notes that marriage rates in Japan have plummeted by nearly 40% since 1990.
40%, that's a societal shift.
He then looks at South Korea's golbang culture. This is a rapidly growing demographic of young, able-bodied men who deliberately choose to live in 100-square-foot, windowless basement rooms.
Entirely checking out of society.
They are completely rejecting the intense societal pressure to marry, produce children, and climb the corporate ladder. Riker's analysis is that these young men have watched their fathers be worked to death or bankrupted by divorce, and they have rationally chosen the isolation of the barrel over participation in the meat grinder.
And it's happening in the West, too. In the UK, he cites a mind-blowing statistic claiming that 45% of men under the age of 35 are participating in an unofficial child strike.
Child strike.
They are absolutely refusing to have children. Not because they don't like kids, but specifically to avoid the legal traps and absolute financial ruin associated with the family court system.
Pure risk management.
Riker insists that society needs to stop framing these men as lazy losers hiding in their mother's basements. He actively elevates them. He calls them rational actors, the true, enlightened philosophical descendants of Diogenes.
He validates their choice.
They have looked objectively at the statistical data of modern marriage and relationships, calculated the risk-to-reward ratio, and rationally chosen personal sovereignty over playing a rigged game.
Furthermore, he argues that the rapid acceleration of modern technology is supercharging this exit strategy.
Tech is accelerating it.
He points to the explosion of AI companions, specifically citing apps like Replica. He notes that millions of male users are currently reporting that they are genuinely happier alone interacting with a digital, customizable companion than navigating the combative, high-risk minefield of modern dating.
So they get the emotional connection without the legal risk?
He then points to the very edge of the biotechnology horizon, discussing early prototypes for synthetic wombs currently being researched at institutions like Harvard and Cambridge.
Synthetic wombs?
For Riker, this technological leap represents the absolute endgame of the gender wars.
The final nail in the coffin.
He argues that when technology can successfully replicate both the emotional companionship and the biological reproductive capabilities of women, the final, ultimate bargaining chips of female leverage will be completely and permanently removed from the board.
Which changes everything.
Men will have zero biological, social, or emotional necessity to engage with a societal system that Riker believes actively despises them.
So bringing all of this exhaustive, intense material together, what Conrad Riker's book, Dao of Diogenes, ultimately achieves is the synthesis of ancient Stoic and Cynic philosophy into a highly aggressive, deeply controversial, intensely modern survival manual for the manosphere.
It's a blueprint.
He is advocating for nothing less than total physical, financial, and emotional independence from both women and the state apparatus. He uses the striking historical image of Diogenes sitting in his tub not merely as a neat historical curiosity or a philosophical thought experiment, but as a weaponized literal lifestyle choice against what he views as a corrupt, terminal, gynocentric society.
It is a comprehensive, airtight worldview for those who adopt it, certainly.
Yeah.
But engaging deeply with this text leaves us with a profound and perhaps deeply unsettling question to consider. It's a question that builds on the foundation of Riker's premise, but extends far beyond the scope of his book. If Diogenes achieved his legendary mythic level of total freedom by completely isolating himself in a tub and severing every single social, economic, and emotional contract with his fellow citizens,
Right.
what actually happens to a complex civilization when millions of its core builders, its infrastructure workers, its taxpayers, and its protectors simultaneously decide to choose the tub?
When they all just walk away.
Does this localized pursuit of complete, unyielding independence lead to an ultimate philosophical enlightenment for the individual man? Or does it inevitably, mathematically create a massive, collapsing void where the very fabric of society itself simply ceases to exist?
That is exactly the kind of massive civilization-level question that makes digging into these sources so fascinating and why we do this show.
It really leaves you thinking.
And remember, we have only scratched the surface of the data and arguments presented in this text. If you want to explore the source material deeply and see exactly how Riker builds these controversial arguments page by page, you absolutely need to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy and read Dao of Diogenes, the First Sovereign MGTOW. and rejecting the good opinion of gynocentrists for yourself.
Definitely go read it.
Also, make sure you follow the author, Conrad Riker, over at his Substack. You can find him at conradriker.substack.com.
Check out his Substack.
Finally, a massive thank you to you for taking this intense journey with us today. Please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the show so you never miss another deep dive into the ideas, the philosophies, and the books that are quietly shaping the undercurrents of our world. We'll see you next time.